There comes a moment in every man's life when something inside him shifts, when who he was no longer matters and who he must become takes over. For Bumpy Johnson, that moment struck at 8:13 p.m., February 12, 1924. It lasted exactly 3 hours and 4 minutes, but in that narrow window everything changed. Before then, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was just another 19-year-old quiet, unknown, working odd jobs since arriving from South Carolina. He stayed out of trouble. He read books. He was invisible. But Harlem had a way of pulling men toward destiny, and that night, Bumpy's found him. At 8:13 p.m., Margaret, his older sister, walked in the front door with her face swollen, her dress torn, and her dignity shredded by 3 white men. In that instant, something inside Bumpy uncoiled. Gone was the soft-spoken reader. What replaced him was colder, harder, a man no longer able or willing to care about consequences. Violence wasn't planned that night. It was born. The first man, Bumpy, pummeled as those shaky apologies spilled out. "I'm sorry, I meant nothing." The second, he didn't get that courtesy. Just bones cracked in silence. By the third, onlookers swore Bumpy was somewhere else entirely. Eyes blank, soul gone quiet. People stood still, watching the storm settle. The 3 men were left broken in the street, Bumpy bloodied but standing alone. Someone finally asked, "Why'd you do it?" He could barely speak, but his voice cut like steel. "They made my sister cry. Nobody makes my family cry. Not cops, not gangs, nobody. And if they try, they'll learn what crying really means." The cops came later, found nothing. Witnesses didn't see a thing. The boy who walked out into the night never came back. Not really. Because that evening, the quiet kid from South Carolina died, and in his place, Harlem's protector was born. If you really want to understand what happened that night, why Bumpy risked everything, you have to know the Harlem he lived in, not the painted version from museum walls. This wasn't the Harlem Renaissance, not yet. That came later, when white America decided jazz was beautiful and black art could be profitable. In 1924, Harlem was still raw, still brutal, still home to over 200,000 black men and women packed into crumbling tenements, taking jobs that paid half as much as their white counterparts. Families fought every day not just for food, but for dignity, for the right to simply exist. The streets had rules, not written, not fair, but unbreakable. Stay on your side. Don't talk back to white folk. Don't challenge, don't resist, and don't forget where you stand. Eye contact with white women? Dangerous. Speaking up too loud? Risky. And if someone stepped out of line, men like the Hudson Dusters handled enforcement. They controlled Harlem's western edge. Irish gangsters who swaggered through black neighborhoods like they owned the oxygen. Shakedowns, forced payments, intimidation. They reminded people daily, you may live here, but it still belongs to them. And on the evening of February 12th, they reminded Margaret Johnson too. Margaret Johnson, 21, was sharp, diligent, careful, never one to step out of bounds. She was a seamstress, earning modest pay, helping her little brother stay afloat amid city life. She lived by the rules, head down, trouble avoided, always invisible. That morning she wore a blue dress with white trim. It wasn't expensive, but it was clean, it was elegant, and it said something dangerous for a black woman in 1924, pride. The Hudson Dusters saw it. To them, that dress said defiance, like she wasn't ashamed, like she didn't know her place. And to men like that, pride was a challenge. It was around 7:30 p.m., corner of 134th and Lenox Avenue. The streets were alive, workers heading home, shopkeepers locking up, music humming low from a nearby speakeasy. Margaret was just trying to get home, hands tucked in her coat, mind on dinner, and whether Bumpy remembered the bread she asked him to buy. That's when 3 men stepped from the shadows of an alley, blocked her path. The leader? Tommy Connors, 28, 6 feet tall, scarred down his cheek like a mark of pride. "Nice dress for a colored girl," he sneered. "Where'd you steal it from?" Margaret didn't flinch, just try to walk around. She knew the rules: don't engage, don't escalate, just keep moving, but they didn't budge. Patrick Flynn, one of the goons, grabbed her arm. "Tommy asked you a question." He slurred, grip tightening. "You deaf or just stupid?" Margaret yanked her arm back. "I bought it, now move." Then Tommy laughed. A mean, cutting laugh that turned heads up and down the street. "You bought it? You all hear that? This Nick thinks she got class." The word dropped like poison. Everyone heard it. 50 people, maybe more, but not a single one stopped walking. They weren't done. Flynn shoved Margaret against a brick wall, not to injure, just enough to remind her who had the power. "You know your problem?" Tommy leaned in, breath sharp with whiskey and bigotry. "You people come up here acting like you're somebody, but you ain't. You never will be." His hand yanked at her collar. Fabric tore, not all the way, just enough to degrade her. Sean O'Brien, the third man, whistled like she was an animal. Margaret didn't cry yet. It wasn't fear, it was rage. But rage without power only burns quietly. She was alone, and they knew it. And then Tommy crossed the final line. His hand came down hard across her face, open palm, sharp, loud enough to snap through the street air. Her cheek lit up red and hot. "That's for talking back," he said. "Next time, remember, walk." Then, like it was some joke, they walked away laughing, tossing insults behind them like trash bags. "See you around, sweetheart," someone spit. Margaret stayed put, back against the wall, her breath staggered, her dress torn, her cheek throbbing, her anger acidic, and 50 people walked by her like she was a puddle on the sidewalk, like she didn't exist at all. 43 minutes later, she opened the door to their apartment. Bumpy looked up from the kitchen table, blinked once, and his book hit the floor. Napoleon's Campaigns. He'd been reading about strategy, about how power works and how empires fall. He was always reading history, philosophy, war. Dropped out of school at 14, but he studied harder than most PhDs. But no book prepared him for that moment. His sister standing in their doorway, not crying anymore because she'd already run out of tears. The defiance in her posture couldn't hide the truth. Her cheeks said everything. And he felt the ground shift. Margaret didn't say a word at first, straightened her dress, unlocked her jaw, wiped at her lips like habit. She'd stopped crying 3 blocks back on purpose. There was no point. But Bumpy, he saw it. Saw past the performance, past the mask. He walked up slowly, eyes locked. "Who?" His voice low, too calm. That calm that comes before a storm no one survives. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Who?" he asked again. "There." "I don't care who they are," he said, voice like falling steel. "You're hurt. That's all I need." She saw his eyes change. It scared her more than anything else. She tried to stop him, told him the Hudson Dusters were too dangerous, that they'd kill him, that revenge wouldn't protect her. But his expression stayed still as stone. "They made you cry," he said. "No one does that, not you, not ever." She asked what he was going to do. His eyes didn't blink. "Make 'em wish they were never born." Then he walked out, closed the door behind him like a promise, and Margaret was left standing in the kitchen, alone with the certainty that the brother she'd known her whole life wouldn't be the same man when he came back. The Hudson Dusters didn't know who Bumpy Johnson really was. Hell, no one did. They saw a bookworm, a quiet kid. What they hadn't seen was how he grew up. In South Carolina, fists weren't sport, they were survival. White kids called him names, hit him. He learned early, swing first, swing hard, finish fast. Harlem hadn't seen him fight. But tonight, Harlem was going to learn. Because those 3 men hadn't just hurt his sister, they'd threatened her safety. And for Bumpy, safety was sacred. He wasn't cleaned up, he wasn't trained, but he was ready, because fear had nothing on family. Patrick Flynn was first. Bumpy found him slouched outside Mac's pub on 133rd, alone, drunk, lost in a cigarette and his own ignorance. Flynn turned at the sound of footsteps, started to mouth something smug, a racist slur maybe, or a tired insult. He didn't finish it. Bumpy's fist came out of nowhere, clean, brutal, straight to the nose. Cartilage snapped. Flynn reeled, confused and bleeding. What the was all he managed before Bumpy drove his knuckles into his ribs. 1, 2. Something cracked. The man dropped, wheezing, gasping for explanation. Bumpy crouched down beside him. Calm, like schoolteacher calm. "You touched my sister," he said, voice level, like he was talking about the weather. "You grabbed her arm. You thought it was funny." Flynn coughed blood. I'm sorry, man, I didn't know," Bumpy said, kicking once more. Kidneys this time. Controlled. Chilling. "You're not sorry, you're scared." "That's different." He yanked Flynn up by the collar. "Face to face now. My name's Bumpy Johnson. Margaret is my sister. And from now on, every mirror you look into, every glance at your face, you'll remember this. Don't touch black women. Ever." Then he dropped him, bloodied, broken, and gasping against the cold Harlem bricks. Bumpy didn't linger. He felt something shift inside, not rage, not joy. Calm, like the years he spent reading strategy manuals were suddenly making sense, like he'd just found purpose. Violence wasn't passion anymore, it was math. Execute the objective. Eliminate the threat. Next target, Sean O'Brien. Word was, he drank at a speakeasy on West 17th. Bumpy entered unnoticed, young, unassuming, coat still dark with Flynn's blood. 30 patrons laughed, drank, played cards. Nobody paid attention to him or to the quiet storm forming in his eyes. He walked up to O'Brien's table without hesitation. "You were on one early truth today." Not a question, a truth. O'Brien looked up, confused, slow, trying to piece it together. His hand drifted toward his coat. "That was a mistake." Bumpy smashed a bottle off the table and cracked it over his skull. Panic exploded. Chairs scraped back, shouts erupted, but no one got involved. O'Brien fumbled for a knife, got it halfway out, before glass slashed across his cheek like a red flag tearing through skin. The fight barely lasted 90 seconds. Bumpy didn't stop until O'Brien was sprawled on the floor, gurgling sounds that didn't form words. Split lips, blood-slick hands. One man still standing. "You laughed," Bumpy said. "That makes you guilty too." The bartender screamed, yelling about cops, about trouble. But no one followed Bumpy when he walked away. It was like everyone just knew interfering wasn't smart. Why? Because they'd just watched something Harlem had never seen before. A young black man, alone, fearless, beating men nobody dared cross. The Dusters weren't gods anymore. They bled like everyone else. And now, by midnight, word had spread. Bumpy Johnson was looking for number 3. Tommy Connors heard the whispers, heard that someone wrecked his boys, left them bleeding in halls and on curbs. But Tommy? He didn't run. He waited because he thought fear made men flinch. Tommy Connors didn't believe in backing down. He believed in brass knuckles, knives, scars that earned respect. When Bumpy walked into Mac's pub again, Tommy stood from his stool without pause. "You must be the Johnson kid," he said, pulling on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You put my boys in the hospital. Big stones on you, kid, but you made a mistake. I'm not them." He was ready, knife tucked at the belt, knuckles in his pocket. What he wasn't ready for was silence. Bumpy didn't answer, just walked forward, closer. No fear, no tremble, just a quiet reckoning marching straight toward him. Tommy struck first. Brass knuckles snapped against Bumpy's jaw. His head jerked back, stars flashing white-hot behind his eyelids. Quick pause. If Bumpy's story has you hooked so far, hit that like button to show some love. And tell me this in the comments: if you were in Bumpy's shoes that night, what would you have done? Fight back? Walk away? I really want to know. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more untold stories like this coming up, and you won't want to miss them. Then came the knife, fast, sharp, aimed for the ribs. Bumpy twisted just in time. The blade cut fabric, not skin. He locked onto Tommy's wrist and slammed it into the wooden bar. The knife dropped, then fists flew. Wild, brutal, no rhythm, no finesse. Just two men in a storm of fists and fury. Tommy was heavier, stronger, more experienced, and he slugged Bumpy with punishing weight. But Bumpy absorbed it all. Because Tommy was trying not to lose. Bumpy, he was fighting for Margaret. A chair crashed against Bumpy's back. He dropped to a knee, breath raspy, muscles shaking. Tommy loomed over him, chest heaving. "Stay down," he warned. "It doesn't have to." The rest of the sentence never got out. Bumpy grabbed the fallen knife and slashed upward. The blade kissed Tommy's thigh. Not deep, but it knocked balance loose. Bumpy was up again, bottle in hand, glass exploding across Tommy's face like salvation. Connors hit the floor hard, blood pouring. Bumpy straddled him, fists landing like hammers, quiet, precise. Each one a memory, the slap, the rip, the laugh. "You hit my sister." Every word a blow. Tommy Connors stopped fighting back. His arms dropped. His body went limp. Sounds came out of his mouth, but they weren't words anymore. Just pain. Raw, broken pain. Bumpy stood up slowly, every inch of him aching. His ribs screamed. His hands were flayed and bleeding. But he had won. No, he had proven something. He bent down, grabbed Tommy by the collar, yanked him upright like dead weight. Connor's eyes couldn't focus. "Can you hear me?" Bumpy asked. A weak nod. "Good. Then let's go for a walk." And just like that, the man who terrorized Harlem got dragged through the streets. People were already peeking from behind curtains and half-open doors. Word had traveled fast. By midnight, Harlem knew what happened, how Bumpy Johnson beat the man most feared. So now, they watched. Dust stirred under their breath. Connors was limp in Bumpy's hands, blood trickling down his face. When they reached the corner of 134th and Lenox, Bumpy looked around. Same spot where Margaret had stood. Same silence. Same bricks. "On your knees," he said. Connors blinked, dazed. Down. His body obeyed before his brain even caught up. The fear had broken through. This wasn't a fight anymore. This was Judgment Day. He was still trying to speak, wheezing and sputtering, too much blood in his mouth for words to land. Bumpy crouched, didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, just whispered, "You can either apologize, or I break your hands and you still apologize anyway. Your choice." The silence was cold, brutal. Then a rasp like sandpaper scraped from Connor's throat. "I'm sorry. For touching her. For what I said, I'm sorry." The crowd that gathered didn't cheer. Didn't clap. They just watched in stunned silence as the man who'd ruled their streets with fear now knelt in the same spot he used to own. Bumpy rose. Turned to the watching windows, the half-open doors. "This," he said, voice loud enough to carry, "is what happens when you disrespect black women in Harlem." He didn't have to scream it. Truth carries on its own. You don't die. You live with everyone knowing what you are, broken. Humiliated, small. Then Bumpy turned back to Connors, told him one thing. "Get out of Harlem. Don't let me ever see you again. If I do, you won't get a second ending." Then he walked away. Left him there, bleeding in the street. And the legend began that would last for generations. But Bumpy knew something most people never learn, not even after a lifetime. Power isn't about how hard you hit. It's about never having to prove yourself the same way twice. That's why he didn't go home. The next morning, he walked into the Savoy ballroom and asked to speak to Stephanie St. Clair. If Harlem was a chessboard, she was the queen of numbers, ran an empire from behind silk gloves and sharper instincts. She already knew what happened, knew who Bumpy was now. The city had been buzzing all night. "You're the Johnson boy," she said. "Quite the night." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She leaned back, watching him. "And you're here because you want protection. You're smart enough to know Tommy might come back and you want backup." But Bumpy shook his head. "No, ma'am. I want a job. I know how to observe, organize, problem solve. I'm loyal. and I don't want anyone thinking they can touch me without going through you." Stephanie didn't respond right away. She just studied him. This wasn't like other boys she'd seen. This one, he didn't ask for safety. He asked for purpose. That was rarer. That was valuable. She saw it immediately. "What makes you think I need you?" she asked. Bumpy stood tall, not flinching. "Because last night, I proved I handle problems, and I learned fast. I'll outwork every person you employ, and I won't bring heat on your empire. I just need one thing. People must know I work for you now." Quiet moment passed, then she smiled. "You start Monday." By noon, everyone knew. Bumpy Johnson worked for Stephanie St. Clair, and the rules had changed. Touch Bumpy now, and you weren't just starting a fight, you were going to war with the most dangerous black woman in Harlem. Connors heard it too. Tommy Connors got the message, understood that if he tried to retaliate, he'd have St. Clair and her whole kingdom coming after him. Worse, his own crew, the Irish mob, had already turned their backs. They didn't forgive weakness. And word was out. He'd cried on his knees while a black teenager beat him bloody. That kind of humiliation doesn't just sting, it kills your name. So 3 days later, Tommy disappeared. Boston, some said. Dock work, started using a fake name. But one thing's certain, he never spoke of Harlem again. Not because of the fists, but because Bumpy made revenge impossible. The story didn't just echo across Harlem, it spread through all of New York's underworld, a ripple that quickly became a wave. People whispered about the teen who stood alone against a gang and won, about how he made their leader apologize in front of half the neighborhood, about how, despite the blood and the risk, he didn't beg for protection. He earned it. And now, he worked for Stephanie St. Clair. That detail mattered. It sent a message. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just tough, he was connected, respected, and untouchable. And like all powerful stories, this one started turning into legend immediately. February 12, 1924 became the night everything changed. On that night, Bumpy Johnson stopped being the quiet kid from South Carolina hiding behind books, and he became something Harlem had been waiting for, someone willing to stand when others walked past. A protector. A symbol. Proof that respect wasn't charity from white men in suits. It was something you took, by force if necessary. All 3 of the men he put in the hospital? Gone. Left Harlem in silence. The Hudson Dusters? Collapsed within 3 months. Nobody wanted to be in a gang crippled by a teenager with purpose in his fists. But Bumpy didn't just vanish into violence. He spent the next 40 years building something bigger than revenge. His organization didn't exist just to make money. It existed to make sure no one else's sister went through what Margaret had. It became muscle for Harlem, protection dressed in power. And Bumpy? He became more than a name. He became a figure on the street, respected as much as feared, because he'd earned it, not through brutality alone, but through sacrifice, strategy, and unshakable loyalty to his people. Even other gangsters, black, white, powerful, understood, you messed with Harlem. You answered to Bumpy. And still, none of it, none, would exist without that one decision. That one night, that moment when the odds didn't matter and fear was irrelevant. He didn't plan, didn't weigh outcomes, didn't calculate safety or survival. He just moved, because his sister had cried. Because power, real power, is when you choose to protect someone no matter what it costs. It's not in history books. Police buried it. Papers ignored it. The men who got beat down never mentioned it again. But Harlem remembered. Because every time someone new came to push its people around, someone told them the story. The story of the night Bumpy Johnson didn't look the other way. The night he found 3 men who thought being white meant being untouchable and shattered that illusion with his fists. The night a boy became something more. Not because of pride, not even because of rage, but because when the people you love get hurt, your response defines who you are. He didn't run, he didn't fold, he didn't blink. He protected. And that is why Bumpy Johnson became Harlem's legend, the man who made the streets just a little safer, one punch, one choice, one unforgettable night at a time. Stories like this remind us just how far someone will go to protect the people they love. But what would you have done if you were in Bumpy's place that night? Would you risk everything for justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful, untold history, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Bumpy Johnson's legacy lives on because people remembered, and now, so will you.